Did you include any professional development goals in your New Year's resolution? Are you thinking about things you can do to make your lessons better in 2024? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of your Pavilion ELT vloggers, and in this series of videos we are looking at different ways in which we can make our lessons more engaging, effective and fun. And in this video, I want to take a different route and share with you 5 things that are somewhat common practice in teaching, but that I feel you should stop doing, at least for a while. Do you want to know what? So come with me. First of all, Happy New Year! I hope 2024 brings you lots of joy and personal as well as professional opportunities. I think January is always a great opportunity for us to rethink some of the things we do in our lessons, sometimes out of habit, sometimes just following a teaching model we had as students. Of course, always take everything I say with a pinch of salt. Only you know what your individual context is, what your students' needs are, and maybe some of the things I mention here are mandatory practice in the school you work for, and that's okay. As long as we are making informed decisions and reflecting upon our practice to actually help our students, nothing really is right or wrong. So let's cut to the chase. Number 1, giving long grammar explanations. Tell me one thing, how many of your students want to be a linguist? How many take your lessons out of sheer passion for English? If you are like most of us, not many. I guess the majority of students learning English are not necessarily intrinsically motivated to know more about the language per se. They want to talk in the English language, not about the English language. That means that many of our students have little interest in the intricacies of grammar rules. In fact, most of them are not even that familiar with concepts and terminology that we use to talk about the language. In a classic and really humorous article for English teaching professional entitled How to Be a Boring Teacher, Luc Prodromou gives us some very helpful advice on what not to do. It explains everything in full laborious detail. Do not assume the students have done any English before or have heard of English grammar. Do not by any means draw on their experience of life, their knowledge of the world or other school subjects. Your students are a blank sheet of paper, or as Locke said, tabula rasa. You're a full vessel and they are empty vessels. Rather than assuming students know nothing or everything, start with examples and use questions to check what students already know, how much they understand of the language you are teaching, and then gauge how far you can go with the grammar explanations. Number 2, asking students to read aloud. I remember that reading aloud was very common in school as I was growing up. In language teaching, it was also very popular in what we usually call traditional teaching, but lost its popularity and became a big no-no in teacher training courses. But let's try to understand why. Whether reading aloud will help or hinder a lesson depends on what you're aiming at achieving. If you want to help your students develop their reading skills, it's probably not a good idea. This has to do with how we read. Outside the classroom, we rarely read out loud, and we are usually able to go back and forth in the text, reread trickier parts, or even skip irrelevant information. According to Chris Payne, by reading aloud with the students reading along silently, a teacher denies the students the opportunity to self-pace, and their memory can become overloaded as they try to listen to the teacher as well as attempting to read and make sense of the text. The same thing happens when a student is reading aloud to the others. The student reading is probably going to be more worried about the pronunciation than actually understanding what the text says. Of course, there are moments in which reading aloud can be beneficial, especially if we're talking about reading shorter extracts to focus on language and pronunciation. When it comes to practice reading as a skill though, it might be better to let students read silently. Number 3, don't rely exclusively on written exams. Written exams and tests are a part of almost everyone's journey as a student. In fact, it's not uncommon for teachers or schools to base the curriculum or syllabus on exams that students might take or grammar and vocabulary items that are exam-friendly. I'm not going to say that written tests are a net negative, quite the opposite. However, the problem I see here is not relying on written tests, but relying only on them to assess our students. According to Matthew Klusterman, I find it important to consider how to create well-rounded assessments that offer students a myriad of different opportunities to demonstrate their learning. These alternative ideas do not suggest that paper tests, reports, and traditional essay-style assessments should be thrown out the window. What is equally important is that we provide varied assessment opportunities so students can demonstrate understanding in different assessment styles. If you are teaching to help students prepare for Cambridge exams, for example, exam-like tests make perfect sense. But if you are teaching a conversation course, communicative tasks would make a lot more sense. Number 4. Avoiding parsnips at all costs. Yes, you've heard it right, but we are not talking about vegetables here. Parsnip is an acronym and it stands for politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and pork. And many advocate that these topics should be avoided in English lessons. This acronym comes from the publishing industry, the great professionals working to create the very course books and materials we use in our lessons. However, unlike our lessons, such materials are designed to meet the needs of a large and very diverse group of learners all over the world, from London to Luzon, from Tokyo to Timbuktu. Considering that, it is clear why topics in published materials tend to be less controversial, to appeal to a more diverse audience. It is our job as teachers to localize the materials, making it relevant to our students and our contexts. Bruno Souza shared his point of view in a very interesting article for Modern English Teacher. Does this mean that we can be open all the time to any topic? Surely not. Rather than simply deciding a topic should never be addressed within classroom walls, we must know our students well enough in order to decide what goes or does not go in our classes. No issue should be a no-go zone before we get to know our students. Remember that many of our learners join our English lessons because they want to operate in a multicultural society. Dealing with culture clash and navigating different points of view is an important part of that. And pretending that controversial topics do not exist end up contributing to polarization, pulling us apart rather than bringing us together. Number 5. Ignoring students' mistakes. Language feedback and error correction are very important elements in a successful language lesson. Still, it's not uncommon for us to see lessons in which feedbacks end up being just an afterthought, a couple of minutes at the end of the lesson without much planning or strategy, if present at all. Many teachers avoid correcting students because they don't want to put them on the spot or embarrass them in front of others. Others do not feel confident about their own language awareness and ability to identify relevant mistakes and provide corrections and explanations on the spot. Those are all valid concerns, but there are strategies we can use to avoid unpleasant situations and still help students focus on accuracy. According to Tony Lee, assessment for learning, of which feedback is an essential part, is ongoing and process-oriented. Feedback should not only come from the teachers, but from everyone involved. It should not only come at the end, but throughout the entire process when needs arise. Teachers might need to be aware of certain techniques in the classroom to invite everyone to take part in the process of formulating and giving feedback. For example, you can compile a number of accurate and inaccurate student samples and pair them up to identify and correct the mistakes. Or you can ask students to give feedback on each other's written essay before they actually hand them in. I hope these reverse resolutions serve as inspiration for you to reflect upon your own performance and identify teaching habits you have that you might put to rest, even if temporarily, just to experiment with other strategies. Have you ever ditched an old teaching habit? What made you do it? Is there any habit that you are trying to get rid of? Let us know in the comments below. And you can also contact me on all social media at @WhatIsELT. Keep learning and keep teaching.